Hey all my dudes, how you doing? I hope you're having a damn good day. Welcome back to the channel, and today we will be talking about and trying to replicate Aston Villa's brand new formation, the 3-5-2 or the 3-1-4-2, however you want to put it. We're going to be discussing those set of tactics and how you can replicate and recreate it in FIFA 23, of course. So as you can see here on the screen, right over there I think, anyway, wherever I've put this camera, that's where it is. But right there you can see it's Ollie Watkins, Diaby up front, the new £50 million man. We've got Matty Cash out wide. We've got John McGinn, of course, the captain. Kamara, fantastic signing a few seasons ago. Douglas Luiz, Moreno, fantastic as well. Pau Torres, another great signing for them. We've got Mings, we've got Consa, and then we've got Martinez. That's our starting 11. Then on the bench we've got Bailey, we've got Buendia, we've got Tielemans, Ramsey, Olsen, Diego Carlos, who essentially will be a brand new signing because he hasn't played for them, he hasn't featured. I think he got injured basically in the first game of the season, last season, so barely featured. And then of course we've got Digne, and then on the bench we've got a few other players that I don't care to mention. I mean, Dendonker's one solid one, Duran another. I heard that Coutinho could be leaving, we don't know where yet, but he could be going. But yes, this Aston Villa team are looking damn near fantastic, and I think they're going to probably win the Europa Conference League. I mean, it's what everybody's saying at the moment. They're the hot favourites and so on. So, just having a look at the formation, as you can see there, it says it's a 3-1-4-2 formation. What I've basically done is I've just dropped the one striker down, made him a centre forward. That's Diaby's position, of course. That will also be the likes of Buendia's position, and of course Leon Bailey. So they don't really have a backup striker that you could put and pair with the likes of a Diaby. It's always going to have to be Watkins, unless they go and buy someone. So yes, of course, 3 centre-backs, 1 DM, 2 central midfielders, 2 wide midfielders, I should say, 1 centre-forward and 1 striker. So just having a look at the set of tactics under Unai Emery, of course, it is more or less going to have the same core values as the previous set of tactics that we did do for Aston Villa, of course, the 4-4-2. If you haven't seen it, check it out. They will still use that, but they will also be using this formation, of course. But basically, they will look to press after the loss of possession. But the fact that you have more players that can bomb on forward and press as high up the field as possible, it does help a lot more, and you will be a bit more aggressive with the press. Also, knowing the fact that you have 3 super solid centre-backs behind you, it does help a fair amount. As for the width in the team, of course, you do have a very young, aggressive set of midfielders as well as wide midfielders who are more or less fullbacks, wingbacks in this situation. So it is set to 45, so the likes of Douglas Luiz, the likes of Kamara, John McGinn, of course, your 2 fullbacks, they will be very aggressive with trying to make sure that the opposition can't really get past them, and if they do, they run into 3 solid centre-backs. So it is a nice, happy medium with it being set to 45. As for the depth, it's a lot higher than what it was for the 4-4-2, and that is because of those 3 centre-backs. You can afford to have a mid-block in place because you do want to try and support the attacking outlet, but also this is more or less going to be a win the ball back, fire a ball forward. So the higher you are up the field, the closer you are to the goal, of course, but it also offers a nice defensive shape to the team if you do tend to lose the ball. So it does help a fair amount. As for the build-up play, it is set to a fast build-up play. You want your fullbacks bombing on forward. You want them to try and support the likes of Diaby and Watkins or whoever you have up front. You want them to have that support because more times than not, with a formation like this, I do tend to see that it is a bit of a struggle with supporting your strikers because more times than not, you want to have a fast-paced build-up, but you're a bit scared because if you lose the ball, things can go wrong. Like in the opposite case of that, you win the ball, you're pushing it high up the field, and it's only 2 strikers versus the rest of the opposition, and more times than not, it's never a positive. So you want to have a fast build-up, you want players bombing on forward, you want the likes of Luiz and McGinn as well as your wide midfielders to try and help and support moving forward, but also have quick passing movements, players moving off the ball as well, runs in behind. You have very pacey players in this team to be able to have a very functioning formation and set of tactics, of course. As for chance creation, it's direct passing. Now, what I did notice was the likes of Pau Torres and Consa from time to time, but mainly Pau Torres, would get the ball, build up the play all the way up to the DM position, and then you had fired balls directly into the likes of Ollie Watkins, Diaby, even Douglas Luiz would find himself a little bit higher from time to time. And they would try and focus their attacks very centrally. Now, of course, you do want to try and fire crosses into the box, but what I did notice was it was very central, especially in the Brentford game, I think. It could have been the Newcastle game, but I'm pretty sure it was the Brentford game where Pau Torres would just collect the ball and he would look for like a little angled pass directly into the striker, and it did cause Brentford or Newcastle, I can't remember exactly who it was, it did cause them a lot of issues going forward, and at times it did feel a little bit forced, but eventually it started working. So you know what, when there's a will, there's a way, and Unai Emery has that will. As for the width, again, it's not the widest of widths to employ, but at the same time, the natural shape and formation, as well as the instructions being factored into it, does make the field a little bit wider, so that you can still have your wide wing backs bombing on forward as well. But also it does stretch out the midfield a fair amount, as well as the two players up front. It does give them a bit more space between themselves in order to create havoc for the opposition defense with the angled runs in behind, as well as the opposition's as well as your midfield making fast-paced movements as well at a little bit of a wider stretch, causing a bit more havoc for the opposition. As for players in the box, now they do tend to have a lot of players in the box. You want to be able to service those players by having a wing-back bombing balls, of course, mainly down the left-hand side. Of course, Moreno is out injured, but I would assume he would obviously take up that left-hand side position, and there was a lot of crosses coming in from that left-hand side. So I do think that there will be a bit more attack down the left. But in saying that, nonetheless, you do want both fullbacks firing crosses left, right, and centre. You want to try and supply the likes of Ollie Watkins, Diaby, more or less not with crosses in the air, but with fast-paced crosses along the ground, the face of goal, of course, for easy back post or near post tap-ins for your runners, of course. And that does also help quite nicely with the chance creation being set to direct passing. So they will be making direct runs into the box, and you want to try and supply them with those balls. As for corners and free kicks, people, as per always, it is set to fall. In terms of the instructions, of course, we'll start off with the goalkeeper. Martinez, of course, World Cup winner. He is set to come for crosses and be a sweeper keeper. Now, obviously, you are playing a slightly higher line, so you do need your goalkeeper to more or less be able to be more willing to run off with his line, claim balls and everything like that, find passes, and his kicking is quite good, so the ability for him to find a running Moreno or a Cash would be quite lethal and quite a positive for you going forward. Of course, he is set to come for crosses. He's a very good keeper when it comes to claiming balls in the air, so he is more or less realistic. As for Mings, he is set to his base set of instructions, but like I mentioned earlier, Torres and Konsa, they will look to try and make runs into the midfield by having the overlap attacking support on. Of course, the rest is all set to normal, so they will look to try and build a base with Kamara. And like I said, as for Torres, you would more or less look for him to try and hit long balls. So if Martinez can't hit the long ball, you'll look for Torres to try and hit angled balls into the likes of either Watkins, Diaby, Douglas Luiz, of course, or even finding a wing back making a run into space behind. And he is fairly good at doing that, which is more or less why I think Emery will try and play this system a lot more, because it does offer a bit more support defensively, but at the same time it allows the likes of Torres to not have to do too much defensive work, because you have the likes of Mings and Konsa to help support him, of course, and of course you do have Diego Carlos on the bench. And then as you can see here for Konsa, he's got his overlap on as well. And then moving forward slightly higher up the field into the DM position, we've got Kamara here set to cut passing and stay back while attacking, cover the centre, and then stick to position. So he's not going to more or less be a deep line playmaker. That's not what he does. But what he does do really well is shield the back line. He's just adding another element, another layer of defensive structure to this team. And he will more or less always be the furthest or the deepest midfielder in this team, looking to try and sweep up the balls, make sure play's ticking over quite well, and making sure the defense is very solid with the offensive opposition being kept in check, of course. Slightly higher up the field now, as for Captain McGinn, he's going to be more of a box-to-box fluid role in this team, so he's going to have a balanced attack, get into the box, of course. You want to help try and support the likes of Watkins and Diaby by drawing other players off of them. And of course he's going to drift wide, so he's going to try and do most of his work slightly wider and try and stretch the opposition a bit more. And then as for his midfield counterpart, he is set to get forward, of course, so he will try and bomb on into the box, try and almost be like an attacking midfielder, which is a nice role that I have seen him play. Of course, the likes of Ramsey can also play in this position, so it does work both ways. He is going to have a balanced crossing run for his support on crosses, so he will look to more or less be on the edge of the box, making late runs into it, operating that half space that does get created by the direct passing, by the likes of Watkins and Diaby making fast-paced runs forward. And of course, he's going to try and implement that press when the ball is lost. So he is more or less going to be one of the triggers in making sure the team presses as a unit. So he will more or less look to lead that from the midfield going forward. And then, of course, he's set to stick to position and cover wing. So he will look to more or less try and help out Moreno, just like McGinn will more or less look to help out Matty Cash. And speaking of Moreno, as well as Matty Cash, they are both set to come back on defense, stay wide, getting behind, get into the box for crosses. So if the one is crossing, the other one's making a late back post run. And then, of course, aggressive interceptions will be on. So I do warn you, your wing back / wide midfielders will be very, very important in this formation. But they, at the same time, the stamina will be drained. So make sure you have the likes of Adina on the bench with somebody to also back up Matty Cash from time to time. So yes, it is vital. So speaking of Matty Cash, there are his instructions, the same as Moreno. So of course, the aggressive interceptions, which are on, because you want to try and implement a more aggressive press when you do lose the ball, and that more or less helps replicate that as best as possible. As for Diaby and Watkins, Diaby is set to drift wide, getting behind. Normal interceptions will be on, and of course, basic defensive support. So depending on how the game's going, he will look to try and drop into the midfield, pick up the ball, make runs at the opposition, creating havoc for the likes of Watkins to then work with and run in behind with, of course. But mainly, you do want him to drift wide, pulling out the opposition, creating more space for Watkins, but at the same time getting him behind because he's got raw pace and power, and he is a fantastic player. And I'm very interested to see how this season he can play as that more or less centre forward / striker. Maybe he will play more on the right wing, but from what I saw, it was the right hand side working in that large area of space that was more or less more times than not left in behind from the opposition's defense. So it will be very interesting to see. And then finally, as for Watkins, he is set to balanced width. So you do want him to sometimes stay a bit more central, but at the same time, he will look to run the channels with Diaby, creating a lot of chaos, because if you have one player running that way and another player running another way, the centre-backs are like, well, where do we go? Who do we follow? And that's what Unai Emery wants. He is also set to getting behind, so you have two very fast-paced strikers that can pull the opposition out of place, mash them up as much as they want, and then still tap the goal in, of course. And then normal interceptions are set to be on, and then basic defensive support as well. So again, he will also look to maybe drop into the midfield from time to time and allow Diaby to advance forward, or he will look to stay forward and have Diaby drop deep as well to collect the ball. Now, I do have another set of instructions. So I did notice that from time to time, there would be a little bit of a bit more of a defensive game plan set in place. And of course, it is Unai Emery, so he can definitely more or less look to do this, especially in the bigger games. So more times than not, it's a solid back five, as you can see right there, with Kamara and McGinn in front of them. Douglas will be slightly higher, you will have a bit more of an advanced role. Diaby is slightly further ahead of him, and then Watkins ahead of him. As you can see there, it's a 5-2-1-2 formation with centre forward striker, central midfielder. He's on a cam, he's a central midfielder, 2 DMs, 3 centre backs, 2 wing backs, and 1 goalkeeper, of course. Now, for this, you're going to want to more or less implement this style of play when you're either playing against a very big team under the cosh and trying to just make sure you get away with a win or a draw, or you're looking to more or less set the defensive tone, make sure you get into a game, you just relax a bit more, and then you can look to try and push on and be a bit more aggressive with your attacking player. So more times than not, they're going to just want to drop back, make sure that they're all in formation, all in their structure, making sure it's very hard to break down for the opposition. The width is set to 20, so very compact, as well as the depth. They're not looking to try and play a very high line. They're looking just to hoof the ball up, maybe a Watkins or a Diaby catches, move on forward. But more times than not, there'll be no real offensive support for those two forwards. As for the build-up play, it's set to fast-paced build-up. Of course, forward runs will be on, so the likes of Watkins and Diaby are going to be making runs in behind. This is more or less where you'll look for the likes of Pau Torres, of course, Martinez, to try and hit those long balls over the defense to try and support your plays. But other than that, you're not really going to want to make too many alterations to it. As for the width, it's also set to 35. So even when you have possession, you're still going to want to remain very compact, very narrow, striking down the middle of the field as well. Players in the box, 2, Diaby and Watkins. Like I say, it's a very defensive structure. As for corners and free kicks, it's set to 2 as well. And then as for the instructions, Martinez, he's set to come for crosses. Of course, he's not going to be a sweeper keeper. He's just going to look to try and claim balls, relieve pressure on the defense. As for Torres, Mings, and Conte, they have their base set of instructions. As for your wing backs in this situation, they are only set to overlap, so they won't be looking to always make advancing runs up the field, they're more or less going to try and stay in their position. But if you do have a long period of possession, they will try and work their way slightly up the field. Of course, as you can see there for Moreno, I've actually just realized Moreno and Cash are in different positions. My honest mistake. They're supposed to be on opposite flanks. So yeah, I don't know why FIFA does this. You set things properly and then you save it and then you come back and it doesn't work. But everybody else is in their right position, so don't you worry. As for McGinn and Kamara, they're going to be the shield in front of this back five, so it's almost like a back seven at times, with McGinn dropping slightly deeper at moments in the game. But he is set to cut passing and stay back while attacking. Normal interceptions will be able to cover the centre, the same like Kamara, who's also set to the same set of instructions. As for Douglas Luiz, he is set to balance attack, so also from time to time he will look to maybe progress the ball slightly higher, but in saying that, not always. So yeah. He'll also look to stay on the edge of the box, so he's not going to be able to get into the box. And then, of course, aggressive interceptions will be on. He's still going to look to try and lead that press from the front. He's also set to cover centre, so very central focused, right? So there will be crosses fired into the box from the opposition, trying to break down and cause havoc for your defence. But of course, your defence is super solid. And then as for Diaby and Watkins, they are more or less your outlet men. Diaby here set to balance width, getting behind aggressive interceptions and come back on defense, also trying to add another layer of defense to this already very defensive compact team. And then as for Watkins, he's set to stay central, getting behind aggressive interceptions and stay forward. So he is the literal only outlet ball, without the likes of Diaby being there, of course. So this is just a formation that I more or less saw and how I would imagine you would recreate it in FIFA. For when Villa didn't have the ball or when they were under a lot of pressure, they would more or less look to try and revert to this, and it worked out fairly well. So yes, guys, I hope you have enjoyed that. If you have, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. The road to 2K subscribers is on. We have done fairly well. Can we continue to do that? I don't know. Only you will really be able to dictate that. So yes, until the next time, I hope you have a damn great day. I am out.